I woke from an 8-hour spine surgery. I listened to a voicemail that should never have existed. I couldn't move my legs yet. My throat burned from the breathing tube. Every machine in my hospital room spoke in slow, steady rhythms, almost like someone tapping a ruler against unfinished concrete. The world felt distant. Then my phone vibrated. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. My father's voice sounded tired. Too tired. "Emma, I know you'll hate me for this. We had no choice. We sold your condo to pay the family business loan. I'll explain everything when you're stronger." The message lasted 23 seconds. I listened to it 4 times. Not because I didn't understand the words, because I understood them perfectly. I had signed exactly 1 document before surgery. It wasn't a property transfer. It wasn't a power of attorney. And it definitely wasn't permission for anyone to sell the only home I had ever owned. As I stared at the hospital ceiling, I realized something almost comforting. Someone had made a very expensive mistake. They just didn't know it yet. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. When people ask me what kind of childhood I had, I never know how to answer. Some memories are built from laughter. Mine were built from blueprints. My grandfather believed every structure carried the personality of the person who designed it. He owned a small architectural drafting office on the edge of Cedar Grove, where the windows always smelled faintly of printer ink and cedar wood. Every Saturday morning, while other children played soccer or watched cartoons, I sat beside him at an oversized drafting table that had scratches older than my father. He never rushed. He measured everything twice, sometimes 3 times. He used to place a sharpened pencil beside my hand and smile. "Strong buildings don't begin with concrete," he would say. "They begin with honest measurements." At 9 years old, I thought he was talking about houses. At 34, I understood he had been talking about people. My parents weren't wealthy. My father, Richard, owned a regional construction supply company with fewer than 20 employees. It sold lumber, roofing materials, and commercial hardware to independent contractors across 3 counties. Business was unpredictable. 1 month, trucks filled the yard. The next month, invoices stacked higher than orders. My mother balanced everything. She remembered birthdays. She packed lunches. She quietly paid bills after everyone else had gone to bed. When she died from ovarian cancer, I was 15. The house became strangely quiet, not empty, just unfinished. My father buried himself inside the business. I buried myself inside school. Grandfather became the bridge that kept us connected. He taught me accounting, property law, basic contract language. He insisted every adult should know how to read documents before trusting signatures. Never assume the person across the table values honesty more than opportunity, he often said. Back then, the advice sounded unnecessarily cautious. Years later, it would become my survival. When I turned 22, I graduated with a finance degree and accepted a position at a commercial lending firm nearly 200 miles away. It was my first real independence. Instead of renting forever, I bought a modest 2-bedroom condominium. Nothing extravagant. 940 square feet, 1 balcony, 1 parking space, a small storage unit. Purchase price, $286,400. My down payment came from 7 years of savings, scholarships, and a quiet gift from grandfather that arrived inside an envelope containing exactly 1 sentence. Build something nobody can take away from you. I framed that note, not because of the money, because of the lesson. For nearly 8 years, life became comfortably predictable. Work, mortgage payments, coffee from the same corner cafe every Tuesday, annual visits home, holiday dinners, phone calls with Dad every Sunday evening. He sounded older each year, The business struggled after several national suppliers began selling directly online. Margins shrank. Large contractors delayed payments. Fuel prices climbed. Still, he always ended every conversation with the same reassurance. Perhaps because I wanted to. Everything changed when my father married Diane. She entered our lives quietly. No dramatic entrance. No obvious manipulation. If anything, she appeared thoughtful. She remembered everyone's coffee order, sent birthday cards, volunteered during charity events. Even grandfather admitted she seemed pleasant, but buildings rarely collapse during construction. They collapse after small weaknesses go unnoticed. The first crack appeared 18 months after their wedding. Dad stopped calling every Sunday. Instead, Diane answered, "He'll call you later. He just stepped out. He's exhausted." Later never came. Then family dinners changed. Decisions were already made before I arrived. Conversations paused when I entered rooms. Financial questions received vague answers. Nothing alarming by itself. Just measurements that no longer aligned. Grandfather noticed it before I did. One afternoon, while we organized old property records in his office, he placed 3 folders across the desk. Inside were corporate filings for Dad's business, ownership percentages, loan registrations, commercial liens. I frowned. Dad refinanced? Grandfather nodded slowly. He never mentioned it. He probably doesn't think you need to know. That answer bothered him. It bothered me too. A company rarely refinances twice in 14 months unless something underneath the foundation has shifted. I asked whether Dad was in danger of bankruptcy. Grandfather leaned back. Not today. Then he looked directly at me. But desperation grows quietly. That sentence stayed with me. Over the next year, Diane became increasingly involved in the company. She wasn't officially the chief financial officer. She wasn't even an accountant. Yet she attended every lender meeting, reviewed vendor contracts, approved payroll timing. Employees gradually stopped calling my father first. They called Diane. Whenever I asked questions, Dad smiled. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. At the time, I honestly couldn't tell. Then came the accident. A delivery truck lost control during freezing rain. My car spun twice before striking a highway barrier. The impact fractured 2 vertebrae. Doctors explained the damage carefully. Surgery wasn't optional. Without it, permanent paralysis became increasingly likely. The procedure would take approximately 8 hours. Recovery would take months. My employer offered medical leave. Insurance approved treatment. Everything appeared organized. 3 weeks before surgery, I visited my father. He hugged me longer than usual, long enough for me to notice his hands trembling. "The business?" I asked. He forced a smile. "We've had worse years." Diane interrupted before he could continue. "We're restructuring." It sounded rehearsed, like language borrowed from someone else's presentation. That evening, after dinner, Grandfather called unexpectedly. "Come by tomorrow." His voice carried unusual urgency. I drove over the next morning. His drafting office hadn't changed in 30 years. Same wooden shelves. Same rolled blueprints. Same brass desk lamp. He locked the front door after I entered. Without speaking, he walked toward the old filing cabinet behind his drafting table. Blue folder. My full legal name appeared across the front. He placed it between us. "If anything ever feels wrong." He tapped the folder once. "Open this." I looked confused. "What is it? Against what?" He smiled faintly. "The future rarely announces itself. You always answer questions with riddles. Because direct answers are wasted on people who haven't reached the right chapter yet." Typical grandfather. I slipped the folder into my briefcase. Never opened it. Not then. Before leaving, he handed me another envelope. Inside rested a brass key attached to a small white tag. No address. No explanation. Just 6 handwritten words. Keep this somewhere only you know. I almost asked more questions. Instead, I hugged him. It became the last conversation we ever had. He passed away from heart failure 11 days later. Everything after that happened quickly.
Funeral, paperwork, estate meetings. My surgery date approached. Grief blurred together with hospital appointments and insurance forms. The blue folder remained untouched inside my home office drawer. I assumed it could wait. After all, life still seemed to have an order. Hospitals, recovery, physical therapy, returning to work. Simple, predictable. Then, 48 hours before surgery, Diane visited me alone. She carried homemade soup, flowers, a sympathy card for losing grandfather. She looked almost motherly. Almost. I know Richard worries, she said gently. You'll be fine. She hesitated. Actually, he's under enormous pressure. I waited. The business loan comes due in 6 weeks. Can refinancing help? She sighed dramatically. Lenders don't trust family companies anymore. The statement felt oddly rehearsed. Before leaving, she hugged me. Then she whispered something I didn't fully understand until much later. Families survive when everyone sacrifices. At the time, I assumed she meant emotional sacrifice. I had no idea she meant property, or signatures, or ownership. The morning of surgery arrived cold and gray. Nurses checked identification bracelets. An anesthesiologist explained medications. Consent forms covered ordinary medical risks. Nothing about finances. Nothing about real estate. Nothing about selling anything. Just before anesthesia reached my bloodstream, I remember thinking about grandfather's final lesson. Strong foundations survive pressure. Weak ones reveal themselves. When I finally opened my eyes again, 8 hours had disappeared. Pain arrived first, then confusion, then my father's voicemail. 23 seconds. One sentence changed everything. We sold your condo to pay the family business loan. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, because my grandfather had spent decades teaching me one principle. Every structure leaves evidence, even collapsed ones. And somewhere inside that unopened blue folder, I had this strange feeling he had already anticipated the day someone would try to steal the house he helped me build. The nurse thought I was crying. I wasn't. The tears came because every movement sent a sharp line of pain through my back. Not because of the voicemail. Years of working in commercial finance had taught me something simple. Bad news should never be answered emotionally. It should be examined. Like cracked concrete. Like a contract. Like a foundation that suddenly begins to shift. I waited until the nurse adjusted my medication before asking for my handbag. My phone is there, I whispered. She hesitated. The doctor wants you resting. I only need one file. She handed me the bag. Inside was my tablet, my wallet, and a small notebook. My briefcase hadn't been brought from home, but I remembered exactly where it was. My condominium. The condominium my father believed he had already sold. That single detail settled my breathing. If they had truly completed a legal sale, why hadn't anyone collected my personal records? Why was everything still where I had left it? Because someone had rushed. And rushed paperwork usually leaves fingerprints. My father arrived 3 hours later. He looked older than when I had seen him before surgery. Not months older. Years. His shoulders curved inward. His beard had grown uneven. He stood beside my bed without speaking. I let the silence remain. After nearly a minute, he finally said my name. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. I had no choice. I looked at him carefully. There are always choices. His eyes dropped toward the floor. Diane said. He stopped. That told me everything. Not the whole story, but enough. When exactly was my condo sold? He swallowed. 4 days ago. Closing? Yes. Buyer? I don't know. You signed documents? I witnessed them. Witness what? The power of attorney. I stared at him. What power of attorney? The one giving the authority while you were hospitalized. I never signed one. His face lost its remaining color. For the first time since entering the room, he looked frightened. Diane said you had. Neither of us spoke. The monitor beside my bed continued its slow rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Did you personally watch me sign it? He closed his eyes. No. After he left, I called the one person who had worked beside me for nearly 9 years. My colleague and closest friend, Natalie Brooks. She answered before the first ring finished. Emma, I need a favor. You sound awful. I've sounded better. What happened? I think someone forged legal documents. There was no dramatic gasp. Natalie understood contracts. She understood evidence. She simply asked, "What do you need?" My home office. The blue folder in the bottom drawer. I'll go now. Nearly 2 hours passed before she called back. I found it. Open it. Paper shuffled. Then silence. Long silence. Natalie, you never opened this? No. Oh, Emma. What? This isn't just a folder. What is it? It's practically a legal survival kit. My grandfather. Of course it was. Natalie began reading. The first section contained copies of every property document connected to my condominium. Purchase agreement, mortgage records, insurance information, county registration. Everything perfectly organized. The second section held something unexpected. A notarized affidavit dated March 18, 2022. Signed by my grandfather. Signed by me. Signed by a real estate attorney. My memory returned immediately. I had signed dozens of routine estate planning documents after buying the condo. I had barely thought about them. Natalie kept reading. There it is. What? The clause. What clause? She paused. I think your grandfather knew this day might come. My heartbeat became strangely calm. Read it. She cleared her throat. No transfer, sale, refinancing, collateral assignment, or change in ownership of the property located at. She continued reading the legal description. Shall be considered valid under voluntary or involuntary representation unless verified through direct biometric confirmation and independent attorney certification previously designated by the property owner. I smiled for the first time in days. Slowly, almost sadly. Grandfather, you unbelievable man. There's more, Natalie said. Go on. He specifically excluded temporary incapacity. What does that mean? It means hospitalization alone can never activate anyone else's authority. Even if someone produced a power of attorney. Even if someone forged signatures. Even if someone convinced a buyer. The transfer itself would fail. Because the property's ownership restrictions had already been recorded years earlier. Quietly. Legally. Precisely. Exactly the way grandfather built everything. Then Natalie stopped again. Emma. What? There's another envelope. The sealed one? Yes. Open it. Inside was a handwritten letter. She read aloud. Emma, if you're reading this, someone has probably mistaken your kindness for weakness. Remember what drafting taught us. Every dishonest structure eventually collapses under its own weight because the measurements were false from the beginning. Do not seek revenge. Seek accuracy. The law works slowly, but properly measured truth rarely needs to shout. Neither of us spoke. The room felt impossibly quiet. My grandfather had been gone for almost a year. Yet somehow, he was still protecting me. The following morning, Natalie visited the county recorder's office. By noon, she called again. I found the buyer. Who? A limited liability company. Name? Horizon Equity Holdings. I've never heard of them. You haven't. But Diane has. What? The registered mailing address belongs to the office building where her cousin runs a property investment company. I closed my eyes. There it was. The missing beam. This had never been an emergency sale. It had been arranged. Someone expected my condo to disappear quietly into the hands of people they already knew. I requested copies of every filed document. 3 signatures immediately stood out. Mine. My father's. The notary. Mine looked convincing. Almost perfect. Almost. Except one detail. I never signed with blue ink. Never. For 12 years, I had signed every financial document using black fountain pens. A habit grandfather insisted upon. Consistency creates evidence, he always said. The forged signature used blue ballpoint ink. A tiny mistake. The kind dishonest people never notice. The hospital's legal department connected me with attorney Daniel Mercer. He reviewed everything without interruption.
Then he placed the papers into a neat stack. I have good news. I could use some. This isn't complicated. It isn't. He tapped the forged power of attorney. Whoever prepared this understood appearance, but not procedure. What do you mean? They skipped verification. They ignored the recorded ownership restriction. They violated notarization requirements. And he smiled slightly. They attempted to transfer property belonging to a woman who was unconscious in a surgical operating room. He leaned back. I've seen stronger fraud cases. Within 48 hours, court filings began. An emergency injunction froze the property transfer. The county recorder flagged the deed. The title company suspended payment. No money reached my father's business. Not $1. The so-called rescue plan stopped before it ever became real. Someone, somewhere, was beginning to realize that the foundation they built on deception had already cracked, and they still didn't know about the brass key grandfather had left me, or what it unlocked. Recovery has a strange way of slowing time. Every morning, the physical therapist asked me to stand for a few more seconds than the day before. 30 seconds. 45. 1 minute. The pain was measurable. So was the progress. That gave me comfort. Life, like architecture, could still be rebuilt one careful measurement at a time. 3 weeks after my surgery, my attorney called. The injunction hearing has become something bigger. The buyer is demanding answers. And they've requested a joint meeting. Who's attending? He glanced at his notes. Your father. The buyer's representatives. The title company. The bank. And the county investigator. I smiled. The meeting was held in a conference room on the 4th floor of the county courthouse. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No television cameras. Just polished wood. A long table. 22 chairs. 8 bottles of water. 1 digital recorder. I arrived wearing a back brace beneath a navy blue blazer. Walking still hurt, but I walked in without assistance. Everyone was already seated. Dad looked exhausted. Dan looked confident. Too confident. She smiled politely when she saw me. I'm glad you're recovering. I simply nodded. Then I took my seat. For nearly 20 minutes, attorneys discussed timelines, signatures, title transfers, and banking procedures. I said nothing. Instead, I observed. Diane said my name 11 times. Each time she tried to sound compassionate. Each time she emphasized family. My father only said my name twice. Both times. His voice almost broke. The buyer's attorney never used my first name. He referred to me only as the lawful owner. That detail mattered, because facts were finally replacing emotions. The title company's investigator placed a folder in the center of the table. We've completed our preliminary review. Diane leaned forward. And the transfer cannot proceed. Why not? There are several reasons. He raised one finger. The recorded ownership restriction. A second finger. The invalid power of attorney. A third. The biometric verification requirement. A fourth. The notary discrepancies. Then he closed the folder. And finally, he looked directly at Diane. The owner was under general anesthesia at the approximate time the alleged authorization was executed. Silence. Real silence. The kind that cannot be interrupted. Diane recovered first. This is all a misunderstanding. No one answered. She tried again. Richard was only trying to save the company. Then she turned toward me. Emma, families make sacrifices. I looked at her calmly. They don't steal. The room remained quiet. For the first time since all of this began, I decided it was time to speak. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just precisely. My grandfather taught me that every structure leaves evidence. I placed the blue folder on the table. I believe you've all met his work. Daniel, my attorney, opened it. One document after another appeared. The original purchase agreement. The recorded ownership restriction. The notarized affidavit. the estate planning records, then the handwritten letter. No one interrupted. When Daniel finished, he slid one final item across the table, the forged power of attorney. Beside it, he placed 12 genuine examples of my signature collected over the past decade. Black ink, every single one. Then the forgery, blue ink. One careless decision, one measurable mistake. Diane's confidence disappeared, almost instantly. First came anger. This is ridiculous. She pointed toward the attorneys. You're making me look like a criminal. No one responded. Then came manipulation. She reached for my father's hand. We were trying to save everything. You agreed. Dad slowly pulled his hand away. For the first time, he looked directly at me instead of at the table. I never saw her sign anything. His voice was barely above a whisper. I should have asked, I'm sorry. Those were the most honest words he had spoken in months. Finally came the tears. They arrived exactly as my attorney had predicted. Diane began crying. Not quietly, not naturally, loud enough to fill the room. I was protecting this family. I did it for everyone. But tears don't rewrite documents. And emotion doesn't erase evidence. The county investigator finally spoke. Until that moment, he had remained almost invisible. Now everyone listened. I've investigated financial fraud for 19 years. He folded his hands. One thing never changes. When honest people panic, they ask for help. When dishonest people panic, they create paperwork. No one argued. Then someone unexpected spoke. Mr. Harold Benson, my father's oldest employee. He had worked at the company for 31 years. He wasn't scheduled to testify, but he had been asked to attend. He stood slowly. I knew Richard before Emma was born. He looked at my father. You built this business by shaking hands and keeping your word. Then he turned toward Diane. But somewhere along the way, contracts replaced character. He looked back at me. Your grandfather would have been proud. That sentence meant more than any court victory ever could. The legal process moved surprisingly fast after that. Within 17 days, the fraudulent transfer was officially voided. The county recorder restored the property's status without interruption. The title company canceled the sale. The investment company withdrew completely. The bank reopened its investigation into the business loan. Several weeks later, prosecutors announced forgery and fraud charges against the individuals responsible for preparing the false documents. My father wasn't charged. Investigators concluded he had acted recklessly, but not knowingly. That distinction mattered. Mistakes deserve accountability. Crimes deserve consequences. They are not always the same thing. The construction supply company entered court-supervised restructuring. It wasn't easy. The business survived. Barely. Instead of losing everything, creditors approved a repayment plan spread across 84 months. Several unnecessary assets were sold. Executive expenses disappeared. The company became smaller. Honest again. Dad and I didn't magically repair a relationship. Life isn't written that way. Trust isn't poured like concrete. It's laid one careful brick at a time. For months, our conversations lasted only a few minutes. Then 10. Then 20. One Sunday afternoon, nearly a year later, he visited my condominium. The same condominium. The one no one had actually taken. He carried a small cardboard box. Inside were my grandfather's drafting pencils, still wrapped with a faded rubber band. I found these while cleaning the office. I held them quietly. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Dad said, I spent so much time trying to save a business that I nearly lost my daughter. I believed him, not because of his words, because this time, his measurements matched. 6 months after that, I unlocked a small safety deposit box using the brass key my grandfather had given me. Inside wasn't hidden money. It wasn't gold. It wasn't another legal surprise. There was only one envelope, one photograph, and one handwritten sentence. The photograph showed the two of us sitting at his drafting table when I was 9 years old. On the back, he had written, "The strongest foundation you will ever own is the ability to say no when everyone expects yes." I framed it beside the original note he gave me when I bought my condo. Every morning before work, I see both messages. One reminds me to build. The other reminds me to protect what I build. Together, they tell the whole story. This was never about revenge. It was about proving that a structure built on truth will always outlast one built on convenience. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.